Everybody knows that forgiveness is one of the highest acts of love that you can do for yourself and somebody else. But very often, people don't know how to truly forgive. You see, the concept of forgiveness is almost played with in our society as this sort of mental exercise. You walk through somebody else's shoes in your mind, and you come to this understanding in your mind, and you might even try to forgive and say that you forgive. You might even feel like the door is closed, and then all of a sudden you're walking down the street, you're driving down the street, and then a flash of a song reminds you of the incident or the person. And the emotional experience is right there in your mouth, on the back of the tongue, and your jaw clenches, and your fingers grip the steering wheel a little tighter. All of a sudden, you're back in it, but I thought I forgave. I went through forgiveness already. Why is it still with me? There's a stickiness, a residue to encounters with other beings. I was going to say humans, but let's expand it to other sentient beings. There's a stickiness in our experience that when we have unresolved emotions, unresolved energy, vibrations, lower vibrations in particular, what happens is that when we try to approach forgiveness from the mind, it actually doesn't work. It's almost like this loop that we go in time and time again. And then you add on top of it that not everybody understands what forgiveness actually is. I remember in my early 20s, I was in therapy. I had a lot of things to work out. I've done decades of personal work, and traditional and non-traditional. And I was talking to a therapist, and I was like, I don't get it. I want to forgive. I just was carrying so much resentment, so much rage, and a lot of this anger was inaccessible to me because I didn't know how to constructively use it in a way that made me feel empowered. Instead, it was very destructive. And so as a result, I put a lid on my anger, and I disconnected myself from the powerful emotion that anger provides. When your boundaries are crossed, when a change needs to be made, when you are in a situation in your life where somebody is trying to take something from you and you have to defend yourself, anger is your friend. But not everybody learns how to work with it. This is something that we also work on in my reality shifting coaching if you're interested. But I was sitting there in the therapist's office asking him, how do I forgive? I want to. I even went to a landmark sorry. I don't know, I can't speak. I went to a landmark, which is this personal development type of conference, and I went to a seminar over a weekend, and it was very powerful. And when I was there, even though it was kind of weird, like they wouldn't let me use the bathroom, and it felt a little strange, but we got to the root of some issues, and I felt that it was very powerful. I remember calling somebody on my way home and professing to them in tears that I forgave them because I had this transformative moment. And then what happened is that life went on, my day-to-day routine went on, and the feelings and the vibration actually didn't leave me. Even though I went through this exercise with these experts at, this really powerful conference setting over a weekend. So it wasn't just like an hour-long lecture, it was like the entire weekend. And so fast forward now a couple months later, and I'm sitting with a therapist, and I'm like, I don't get it. I thought I forgave, and I don't understand. Like, it was this puzzle within me that I couldn't solve. And I'll never forget what he said to me, and it was so powerful to help me understand what forgiveness looked like. And he was right. Although now I understand that there are other nuances and flavors that I would add to this package of what is forgiveness, but he was just giving me a little piece. He said, forgiveness is when you no longer expect something from somebody. Forgiveness is when you no longer expect something from somebody. I thought that was so remarkable because it gave me something to chew on intellectually and to help me understand that I was still expecting. I was expecting an apology. I was expecting remediation. I was expecting lots of things, actually. I was expecting a Christmas card, Christmas present. I don't do cards. I was expecting this acknowledgement. I was expecting this person to treat me in a very specific way. Now, some of that's on me because my expectations of making people prove themselves to me were really egregious at the time. And so I had lots of little boxes that if you loved me, then you had to check all the boxes in this particular order. And if you didn't, then you obviously didn't love me. And so as a result, then I would harbor this anger and resentment. And that's a me problem, not a them problem. But I did actually have some unresolved wounds that I had to work through that were not the box checking about why people treated me a certain way, especially when I was young and when I was naive and I didn't know better and I didn't have a choice, I felt at that time. And so for years, I worked through this and I practiced not expecting things from people. And what this did is I released attachment. And over time, what happened is that when I fully let go and I started seeing truly their perspective, not just intellectually, but I started really empathizing. You know, when we are wounded, even you could be the most empathetic person. You could be the biggest empath in the world, the most highly sensitive person. And there's something that happens that when you feel wounded or attacked or let down, all of a sudden the empathy part of your brain just like, yeah, we're going to turn that off. And it's so weird because I've seen it in myself and I've seen it in others. There's something that happens, especially if there's significant trauma or horrific things, like, you know, like things that you can go to jail for. Like, I won't list them, but, you know, like the darkest parts of humanity, people acting against others in the darkest boxes. It's really hard to empathize. Yes, there's Stockholm syndrome, but that's a different phenomenon. But true empathy is almost like maybe the self-preservation mechanism, I'm just guessing, kicks in and is like, we're not going to let you get close to this person because you need to protect yourself. And so it's like the empathy is very limited. I'm just guessing. I don't know, but there's something that happens. And other people, I've seen the most empathetic, kind-hearted people turn into the most non-empathetic person when they feel that they need to protect themselves or they need to distance themselves, and when they are having trouble forgiving. And so what happens is that you could spend your entire life running in circles and loops, trying to forgive from your mind, but not actually releasing. And when you start to release attachment to expectation, to outcome, to the person or people or group or organizations, when you actually just really start letting go and really walking away, it creates almost this vacuum of energy, which somehow allows for a different modality of perspective taking. And I'm figuring this out as I'm talking, you know, like I'm analyzing myself and trying to verbalize my own process. So this may change over time, and my opinion may change over time. And this is the first time I'm teaching about this. But essentially what happens is that something shifts in your mind and your cognition. That's what happened to me. And I was actually able to reconnect with my empathy because I distanced myself from my crushing pain and my crushing resentment. And it's the process of letting go and just almost saying, you know what? I'm really intentionally going to stop expecting an apology. I'm just going to let that go too. I'm going to stop expecting this and this and this and this. And so what happens is when you do that personal work, it creates a vacuum for change. And in the end, I got the apology. I got the recognition. Isn't that amazing? I actually created the space for the transmutation to occur because I wasn't holding on so tightly gripped to the reality of the ever-present constant pain. And when I stopped expecting and when I started letting go, something happened to where it was almost like I shifted into a different relationship with that person. And everything that I wanted in my 20s, I actually got, but it took being in my 30s. And it took different life circumstances. And it took me actually truly being empathetic, which somehow helped them feel seen. And then somehow helped them open up to their part of the actual mistreatment. There was actual mistreatment. And so the other thing about forgiveness is that it creates an energetic, it's a vibrational shift. And a lot of you already know this. It's a vibrational shift. And so that's why it's also really important not to come at it from the mind. It's almost like you have to come at it from the heart, because it's carried in the heart and it holds you down. And I was talking to my mom earlier today, and she was telling me about a story of somebody that she was talking to who's a Buddhist, and they were talking about my grandmother who's not doing so great right now. And her caretaker is Buddhist, and so they were talking about this difference in religion. And the caretaker with the Buddhist philosophy brought it up and said it's really important to forgive, because if you don't, you'll just have to repeat this cycle with the person in the next life. And regardless of your opinion on reincarnation, I actually believe that there is a coupling effect, a quantum coupling, a lifeline tethering that keeps you karmically bound. And whether or not you actually reincarnate and find each other again, I believe that if the link is strong enough, then that will happen. But it doesn't always happen, and in my opinion. But there is something that, even if it's not that person, it'll be that lesson. And so even if it's not that soul and that consciousness, like let's say you shift realities and you shift away from them and they stay in a lower world and you shift to an upper middle world, then what happens is like your contract is done with them, your tie is done with them, but you carry a piece of this. I'm almost visualizing this like corkscrew. You carry a little corkscrew in your energetic field that whenever you meet somebody that has a similar archetype or comes with a similar lesson, it starts to unwind and eject that corkscrew. And then you create this lifeline with them and it plays out like you're hooked into each other. Even though you've reality shifted, you're hooked into the same lesson because you have the same template that is still active in you. And then that magnetizes the template in somebody else. And so when you start to really forgive energetically, it releases those little screws and they just fall out of your auric field like doop, like they were never there. But it has to be from a true place of forgiveness. And the other aspect, and this is something that I've been working on, the other aspect of forgiveness that I would like to add to the brilliant psychotherapist is forgiveness is actually transcending the humanity and seeing how it helps you, seeing how that event actually propels you forward, releases you from imaginary prisons, in my case recently. And when you start to step out of the human perspective and you see it from the eyes of the cosmos, and you see that maybe it was catalyst for growth or catalyst for change in your life, when you take out the pain and the suffering and you look at the net effect, very often it's positive. In my case, at least, I don't want to speak for you, but in my case, it's actually created better things in my life because it allowed me to see where I needed to draw boundaries and to say enough is enough. Like, I can't do this. No, I'm not going there. Whereas before I might have entertained that, or I might have kept people in my life that weren't treating me right. Like our value systems weren't aligned. And so as a result, I was repelling people from my life who would treat me right or who would reciprocate. And so this has been a big part of my shadow work journey. So as a result, being, quote, harmed by those that weren't treating me the way that I knew that I deserved to be treated actually gave me an opportunity to value myself even more and to reconfigure my life, to open the door for the right people to let the right ones in, versus just, having a shit show party with people in the back that were like shady characters and didn't really care about me, were just trying to use me or abuse me or whatever, and that's even a perspective of mine that, sometimes I shift out of because that's part of victim consciousness. But, self-interest is a real thing. And when you have somebody that is very generous, like you might be very generous, and so you might have a tendency to attract the quote unquote self-interest, narcissist typologies into your life. I'm not a big fan of that word, but for a shortcut, talking about a personality template, it's easy to use, but I actually believe that it's more complex than that. And so as a result, you might surround yourself with people who don't see you, that don't value you, that don't take care of you. And you might give and give and give, and they might be like, hey, thanks for all the giving. Thanks. Yep, I'll take more of that. I'm reminded of somebody I've told this story before. I don't think in this series, but in my Breaking Patterns segment, where somebody actually told me it was easy to take from you because I thought you had more, or I thought you had a lot. And I didn't actually, but they perceived me from a different perspective, a different angle, because I was not stressed about my circumstances. And that was like during the pandemic and between jobs and things like that. So they actually were relative to me in a much better position, but they were coming from a very self-interested position. And this was a pattern in their life. And so they saw me and they saw the generosity and they were like, oh, well, it was easy to take from you. Like when I finally spoke up about the imbalance, they were like, oh, well, sorry, I thought you had more and you're easy to take from. And I'm like, what's going on here? Why am I attracting people like this? Like it really made me question like who I was bringing into my life. And so I've been working on forgiveness with that person and forgiveness with myself for inviting them so close to me when I felt that I wasn't treated the way that I expected and the way that I deserved. And I booted them out, right? And I did so in a very assertive manner. But you understand how now this is an opportunity for me to level up. And so the forgiveness that comes energetically is about seeing the bigger lesson and how it actually helps me to build the life of my dreams once I get past the resentment, of course. And sometimes it actually surprisingly still comes up, which is why I wanted to do an episode on this if any of you are also struggling with this, because of all the personal work that I've done, and I have done a lot, I'm often surprised at these residual energetic memories and imprints that I even still carry around, even though I do forgiveness work and I let go and I see things from different perspectives. Sometimes I'm like, I get still a little frustrated. And so it tells me that I still have a little corkscrew in my auric field that I have to continue unwinding and to allow it to release. So listen, I am a reality shifting coach and also a shadow patterns coach, where I look for your corkscrews and your triggers and your wounds, and we work at a very fast pace. It's like 6 months of personal work in 1 week, one very intense week, and then a second week of integration time and more downtime. If you're interested in this, then I do have a couple of slots open in December, so let me know. You can reach out to me at sacredjourneyproductions@gmail.com.